The following is a conversation, a spoiler filled conversation on the book Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. Kathy Trithardt has agreed to come on. We did a book buddy read, basically, and we're going to talk about this great novel, this award winning novel. It won the Newbery Medal. I really liked this book. I thought it was fantastic. I'm not huge on YA. I'm in the Harry Potter series right now, and I'm really into that. But this was like refreshing for me. It was a quick read. I thought it was a great read. It gave a piece of history that I wasn't even aware of. So I was all for this thing. What did you think about it?
I really enjoyed this because usually when we're taught history of World War II, it's taught from like what was happening in Germany and a little bit in the UK. And I don't really hear about other countries that are in Europe. So I hadn't known any of this history of Denmark whatsoever. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, it really was eye-opening for me. I even looked a little further into the issue. By the way, for the viewers, Kathy has her own booktube channel. She does a great job over there. She's got a lot of stuff going on. So I'll put the link in the description for that. You're going to want to pay her a visit. I brought up a list of questions for a reading group on this book, and we're going to work through maybe 15 of them here quickly, give our thoughts on it. Number one, I'll take this one first. What are some changes in Anne Marie's home and city caused by the war? Which change would bother you the most if it happened here? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that these people were being hunted. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to wake up or even fall asleep knowing that they could crash in at any moment. It would be like you were living paranoid, basically. So that was like huge for me. I couldn't imagine if that happened here, if a country invaded America and we had to hide. That would just be extremely, extremely scary and troubling. What do you think?
Yeah, that's definitely troubling. And the whole occupation aspect of it. So having soldiers on every street corner and not being able to do something silly like run down the street with your friends without having to freak out about what that's going to mean when somebody sees you doing that. And then it's even down to the little things like not having certain types of food anymore because the German soldiers are taking it to Germany and all of that type of thing. So it was a bunch of little things that by themselves are like just unfortunate, but then you just see it building and building and building to this like complete occupation, which is terrifying.
Yeah, that is true. In the book, they talk about these minimal food sources that they're eating on potatoes. They don't have any butter or anything. That would be kind of rough for a first world person to have to get by like that. It would have been very troubling.
Mhm.
Question number two. Did you see an example of thoughtfulness or considerations for others in this story? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that in this book, there's a little girl named Anne Marie, and she's friends with a Jewish girl, Ellen Rosen. And Anne Marie's family, they're not Jews, okay, but they decide to help Ellen's family when the Germans come in. Of course, we all know about this kind of thing because of Anne Frank, right? Some people helped her, and she was up in the attic and all this stuff. And it really was like beyond thoughtful that these people put themselves at risk. In the book, the Rosens actually send their daughter to stay with, what is Anne Marie's last name? Anne Marie Johansen. The
Yeah.
Johansens take in the little girl, Ellen, into their home because she's at risk for being caught. So, yeah, that's my thoughts about that whole thing. What do you think?
Yeah, the first thing that sprang to my mind for that specific question was the scene where they were staying in the same bedroom together, and then they heard somebody knock on the door at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And Anna Marie, the first thing she said was, "I need your necklace," because her Ellen is still wearing a Jewish necklace, and she's like, "You need to take that off. I need to hide it." And like that was her first thought. I'm like, yeah, and I had that thought even as like it was being described in the book as they were like going to bed or whatever, and we saw this necklace. I was like, you're gonna want to take that off because that's gonna show who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point that when those soldiers came in, that Anne Marie's only thought was for the safety of her friend there, even at risk to herself. You can see
Mhm.
The necklace is right there. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you read the book or did the audio book or what, but actually this picture, pretty interesting piece, pretty interesting fact. Lois Lowry actually went over there to Denmark to investigate and do interviews for this book, and she actually took the picture of this little girl right here for the cover. So yeah, it's definitely legit.
Cool.
Number 3 here. Did you see examples of honesty or dishonesty? How did you feel when you read about them? And what comes to mind here, there's a character in this novel named Peter, and he's like a resistance person. If you haven't read this book, what was happening over there in Denmark was that the Nazis came in and they wanted the Jews. And there was this plan put together where the Danish Jews were being taken out of the country secretly by this secret organization of underground people that risk their lives to get them out of there, to get them over to Sweden to save their lives. So the only thing that's coming to my mind as far as dishonesty was it seemed as though the people had to be dishonest with the authorities to save their own lives. And Peter puts his own life at risk in this, which is really interesting. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I was specifically thinking, again, with dishonesty, just the little things that had to happen in order for people not to be caught, such as Anne Marie trying to take that basket down to the water just before people were going to be taking off. And she doesn't know what's in the basket. She just knows her uncle really, really needs it. And she does come across soldiers, and she immediately flips into the just pretend that you're a stupid kid mode, because otherwise they're going to mess with you and they're going to find whatever this is, and it's not going to be good, and you're going to get in trouble type of thing. So it was never like, I never thought of it as like lying, even though that's exactly what it is. I thought of it as just what you needed to do to survive a situation.
Yeah, and she showed like a lot of maturity there as a
Yeah.
10-year-old with those, and they had this dog on a leash that was like trying to get her and all this stuff. Man, her heart
Mhm.
would have had to have been pounding at that
Yeah.
point. But yeah, that is true. That's a good piece of insight. Number 5, and maybe that was this for me. What was one of the most suspenseful parts of the story? What did you
Mhm.
like or dislike about it? You want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. That was definitely up on the list for me. The other part was just before then, when when everybody's been taken out of her uncle's house, and it's just her and her little sister left in the house, and she's waiting for mom to come back. And she's like, "Okay, well, I know how long it takes to get there and come back." And she kind of falls asleep because it's the middle of the night, and she wakes up and her mom still isn't there. And just there, I was like, "Okay, what happened? Like, did everyone get rounded up?" Like, I had no idea what was going to happen. Then just for her to look out the window and see her mom like crawling through the ground, being like, that was pretty suspenseful. And then obviously that follow-up scene of her going through the woods was also pretty suspenseful.
Yeah, and that's what comes to mind for me. In the novel, there are a group of people meeting together, and their goal is to get some Jews out of Denmark, to put them on this boat and send them over. So Anne Marie's family's at this place. They're having a secret meeting, hiding from the authorities. And there's like this paperwork that has to go with the Jews that they're sending across the river to Denmark, and the paperwork gets dropped. So Anne Marie has to take this paperwork. What happens is the Jews make their way from the secret hiding location to the boat, and they need that paperwork to make this a success, to get them over there. Paperwork gets dropped, and it's up to Anne Marie to take this paperwork and race it to the boat, which is probably like miles away through the woods. And she comes across some German soldiers, and that was like really suspenseful for me. That was a troubling part. I didn't know what was going to happen there. And give me your thoughts on this, because when I read this book, wasn't exactly sure what to expect of this. And I liked the fact that like it wasn't extremely gory and violent and murderous, even though that was like what was happening. The book isn't that type. So I would actually recommend this one to someone, even if you're a lighthearted reader. But I thought it worked really good. The balance between these horrible atrocities that were happening and the author showing like the loving, joyous parts of these people's lives and their love for one another and these sacred friendships. What did you think as far as did it go like you thought it would go, or what did you think about that?
Well, going into it, I knew that it was written for an audience that was about 10 years old, so I assumed it
Yeah.
wasn't going to get super gory and super bloody and that type of thing. And that's why when originally you were like, "Yeah, let's read this book that has to do with Nazis," I was like, I don't know if I want to read about Nazis." But knowing that it was at like a 10-year-old's level, I was like, "Well, it's not going to get super bad. It's going to still be bad because obviously, but it wasn't going to get like gory and that type of thing." It's interesting that you mentioned with the package that it was paperwork. I interpreted that differently. I interpreted that as the handkerchiefs that the
You
scientists had
are
put that scent
right.
into. Yeah, I was like, was there also paperwork or was it just these? But yeah, that whole history was very interesting to me. The fact that they had taken handkerchiefs and they had figured out something to put onto handkerchiefs that when dogs smelt it, it basically makes their scent
Oh,
or their ability to scent go away. And it's like a mixture of cocaine and something else. So you're basically getting these dogs really high, and then they couldn't find people on the boats that they were searching because their scent was just messed up, which I found so fascinating. I had never heard of that tactic before.
yeah. I must have had a cross here in my mind. For some reason, I thought it was paperwork. But what happened was that the Jews had these rags, and there was a problem because when the Jews would get on the boat, they would hide them very well. They even had like these piles of fish on the boat that would stink real bad. The author describes in the novel, and the dogs would just smell the people right out. They would just
Yeah.
get them, right? The Nazis would come with these dogs on leashes, and they would go and they would get the Jews and find them in these boats. So this is a real piece of history. I think she says it at the end of the book. She talks about this. What they did is they had these rags that were like cocaine was in them, and there was something else in them, and they would take these rags out and get it close to the dogs because it would like mess the dogs up, this concoction that was in this rag, and it would prevent them from being able to detect the Jews that were hiding on the boat. That's a really fascinating and true piece of history. When I was reading that, I thought this is just fiction, part of a novel. I didn't realize until afterward, when I did a little investigation, that this is actually like a historical kind of YA book where she went to great pains to get the things right in this book. She went over there and did interviews and so on.
Yeah, and she even mentioned that in the afterword because she's like, I know this seems like something that an author would just put in a book to make an interesting twist, but no, this was real. And I was like,
Yeah.
that is really cool.
Yeah, Lois Lowry's hit some home runs. She wrote The Giver as well. Have you
Mhm.
read that one?
I read that as a kid, yeah, so it's been a little bit of time, and also I didn't realize there are 3 novels after that in the series, so I'm gonna eventually have to just read the whole series.
Pardon me, but yeah, I didn't know it either. But here's The Giver, which I read for the
Mhm,
first time as a 35-year-old man. I know I
mhm.
was supposed to have read it in school, but I didn't want to do it at that time, so I didn't. And here's the second installment, Gathering Blue. Haven't read it yet,
Mhm.
but I have purchased it. So no spoilers on The Giver, but the way that it ends, like you want more. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna dig in as far as that goes. But Lois Lowry hit like at least 2 home runs as far
Mhm.
as the novels that she wrote. Let's do another one here.
Sure.
What did you think of the soldier who tore Lisa's baby picture, threw it on the floor, and ground his boot heel into it? Go ahead.
That was one of those ones where, like, I just sat there wanting to throw the book across the room, but obviously didn't because the book was on my phone, and yeah, that would be bad. But that's also one of those things where, like, some if I'm listening to audiobooks and that type of thing happens, I scream at the audiobooks depending on where I am. So, like, if I'm driving and I'm by myself, I will full on be screaming in the car over that type of behavior, just because, like, why? It's completely unnecessary to be a jackass like that. It's just completely unnecessary, especially because, like, these are the people that you're not even looking for. You've just woken them up in the middle of the night and you're being super rude, and then you didn't get your way. You didn't get to find a secret Jewish person in this place, so you're gonna destroy people's property? Like, ah.
Yeah, what happens in the book is that the Johansen family, um, Anne Marie's mother and father, and Kirsty, who we've got to talk about here. I really liked
Mhm.
her as a character. She was maybe the
Mhm.
best one for me. But what happens is they're hiding Ellen in their home with them. They have the little Jewish girl in their home protecting her. And guess what? The Germans show up. They want to know if there are any Jews in the house. So they come in and they start interrogating people. That's like when you said when Anne Marie ripped her necklace off
Yeah.
so that they wouldn't realize that her friend was a Jew. And they start going through the family's property. Actually, the father gets the picture out because he's trying to convince the authorities that the little Jewish girl, Ellen, is actually his daughter, right? And he
Yeah, because
pulls out
everybody else is like
yeah,
blonde and that type of thing, and she's not. She's like, but he's like, no, look at these baby photos. Like, these are my kids, and look, she's always had darker hair. It's just a thing.
yeah, that was a troubling one. And I can't say enough that even though this novel is projected at a 10-year-old audience, like there are some deep philosophical conundrums within this book. For example, with what we're talking about with this officer, that he just wanted to torment them. Some people in life, the bullies in life, like to get somebody down and they like to stomp them and terrorize them. And that was what was happening there. So, it's just such a troubling thing to think about everything that happened with the war and everything. Hopefully, we'll learn our lesson on that. But, I was considering the minds of those people, those German soldiers, and, it was all just very troubling.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see here. Let's do another one. Did any part of the story make you angry? Why?
That one,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
Basically, anytime the German forces were doing anything inappropriate, like when they came into what was supposed to be a funeral and just started like screaming at them for having a funeral and being like, we should be opening up this casket and looking at the corpse and that type of thing. And obviously, we don't want that to happen because this isn't an actual funeral. But still,
Yeah,
it's completely disrespectful to show up to somebody's home while
yeah.
they're having a funeral and scream at them about it.
Yeah, and another one of the questions here, did you see any examples of quick thinking? And that was a really quick thinking example. In the book, they're pretending to have this funeral to put the authorities off. And the Germans come in and they barge in on this funeral and they're being really tyrant like. And the mother has to like do some quick thinking to stop the German soldier from opening that casket up because they were skeptical about whether there was really a funeral going on there. And that would have been just such a common occurrence for something like that, for them to blow into somebody's house and just destroy their property and drag them off and take them to these horrible places of torture. It really she managed to cover such a troubling topic in a way that was a really actually engrossing read for me. Hey, let's talk about Kirsty here before we finish up. We'll do a couple
Sure.
more questions here. Kirsty is this little girl in the book. She's the 5-year-old sister of Anne Marie.
Hmm.
And I loved her because she was like not going to allow anyone to violate her space or anything.
Hmm.
She didn't care about the dangers. Perhaps she didn't fully realize, because in the book, the author talks about like that was just business as usual for Kirsty because that's all she had ever known was the German occupation. But like there's a couple times where she puts everyone in danger by not allowing them to touch her and whatnot. What did you think of her as a character?
I thought she was such an interesting character because so much could go wrong with having like a blabbermouth type of character, just because she doesn't know any better. That's the thing with kids. Kids are super unpredictable. So there were a couple of points where I was very worried that the whole thing was going to be blown because Kirsty was going to say something, and I was quite. It was quite remarkable that that didn't happen at any point.
Yeah. Um, you know, that is a good point. I really just can't give enough credit to the author. I actually am struggling to write my first short story. I realize that it's a bust for me as a writer. I basically gave up, but like she managed to put so much good information in a book this short. It
Mhm.
must just be some kind of skill you're born with to be able
Yeah.
to do this thing. And the characters, what I was getting at with Kirsty was like, it was like just so believable. I could see her as in my
Mhm.
mind's eye, I could see her, this little girl that was going around. She was confident and everything, you know. So it was just a real winner. She was my favorite character, except for maybe the character that we didn't get to see a whole lot about, which was Peter. And he
Mhm.
was someone that in the book, Peter is not a Jew. He's not in danger like the Jews are, but he was actually Lisa's companion, and she dies, and now he's trying to help the Jews get out and everything. And he seemed like the guy that was just willing to die for what he believed in. And at the end of the book, in the afterword, she talks about the fact that Peter was inspired by an actual person, and Peter ends up dying at the end. So I'm just curious what you
Mhm.
thought about his role, because we didn't really get to meet him.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating that we kept seeing him come back into their lives even after the eldest daughter had died, because the sisters are told that their oldest sister died in a car crash or died by being hit by a car. And although that is true, they didn't know the whole story of the fact
Yeah.
that her sister and her fiance Peter were working with the resistance. So I found it interesting that at first I was just like, oh, he's just a really nice guy. That still comes like back to see the family that was going to be legally his family if it hadn't been for that incident. And then as you kind of listen in on their conversations, you learn a little bit more about like, no, okay, there's something more going on here, and he's actually passing information. And that made him so interesting to me, because how do you coordinate something like that? Like, I can't even think of how I would coordinate something like that, who to talk to, who I could even trust. It's a dangerous game.
Yeah, you know what a really great part with Peter was that Anne Marie races through the woods and she manages to get by the Germans and keep that cloth. Boy, that was a close call. And
Mhm,
she gets there and she gives that cloth to Peter, and he's like so relieved by the fact
mhm.
that she managed to get that to him, because he knew what was likely to happen if they didn't have that cloth. I can only imagine what that would have been like if they wouldn't have had that cloth. But you know, it really seemed like Peter was just a genuinely good person, because like he was so worried about the other people's, well, it would have been his well-being as well, I guess, being on that
Mhm.
ship. You know, a point I want to make here before we close out is that like this book highlights like the most selfish part of the human nature and simultaneously highlights the most selfless part of the human nature, because there were so many people. I actually read a book called The Hiding Place, where this woman in real life, it was a true story, she was hiding Jews in her house during World War II.
Mhm.
She gets caught, goes to the death camps and everything, ends up surviving them and writing a memoir. But you know, it really is a testament and maybe a bit of optimism that um, people were willing to die for people, and oftentimes they didn't even know who these people were, and they were willing to die because they just realized inherently that what was happening was wrong. So,
Yeah, what was remarkable was the fact that they had just less than 8,000 Jewish people living in Denmark at the time, and more than 7,000 of them got out. Very few of them actually died in the concentration camp. More people survived the concentration camp than died en route to or in, which is just a lot to think about.
yeah, I was looking at an article earlier, and like there were like 464 people that didn't make it. They got almost all of those people out of there. You know, those people would have never been able to make it out themselves. They had to have other people to vouch for them and pretend on their behalf.
Mhm,
You know, it just really, I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why World War II is probably like the most fascinating historical subject for me, I guess, because
mhm.
of the stakes involved on both sides. So I gave this book a 4-star review and a pretty strong recommendation. I thought it was really good. I enjoyed the fact that it was a brief, quick read, but that it was totally enjoyable. Hell, I could have taken more with this. I wanted more actually to
Mhm.
know what happened with these people. We're going to do one more question here.
Sure.
Uh, First, tell me how many stars you give it out of 5, and if you recommend it, or what do you want to say in conclusion?
Oh, I gave it a 4 star as well. I was actually just checking my spreadsheet as you were talking. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's full of a bunch of history, like I said, I didn't know before, and I find it very valuable to have that information.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had no clue that there were Jews in Denmark and that all of this underground resistance and stuff. You know, it was a whole historical piece that was totally blank in my mind, and now I've got something. I wouldn't might maybe reading like a nonfiction book now that I've read this, covering that subject because you know, it's just such a fascinating thing. Let's do one more here.
Mhm.
Do you think Anne Marie will see Ellen again? Why or why not?
Well, that's because I don't know really what the migration was post World War II. I don't know if she ever comes back from Sweden or if they go visit her or if it's even going to be that easy to find people. Like you can't just look them up on Facebook or whatever. That's not the times. But I have to imagine that there had to be some form of record keeping, at least on the Sweden side, because obviously they're able to be open about the fact that they have Jews because they're not occupied and that type of thing. So I feel like they will see each other again, but that might just be me really wanting them to see each other again. Um, but didn't I believe actually the book opened with the fact that they were going to, or not the book opened, the book closed with them talking about the Rosens coming back. So maybe, yeah, in my mind, they definitely get to see each other again, 100% for sure.
Yeah, you know, they had such a close relationship, these two children did. And then they escape, the Rosens get out and everything, and then it just kind of it just stops.
Mhm.
You don't know what happened with the rest of their lives. You know, I wouldn't mind a second installment of this thing to tell me what
Mhm.
how these people grew up and if they were best friends for the rest of their lives and all this good stuff. You know, but I thought this
Yeah,
was
and just like what the lasting effect of the occupation was and what life looked like after the German soldiers left would be really interesting to know.
yeah, you know, I wouldn't doubt that there are some like well, I'm certain that there are some real life cases that were
Mhm.
like this where people got separated and maybe the person on the other end survived it and they met back up and everything. You know, that would be really interesting because, you know, I guess in conclusion, we'll give our conclusion here and then we'll cut it off. My conclusion here is that this book highlights a piece of history that I just don't understand what it would have been like. I mean, I can try by reading these books because it would have been just such a troubling time in Germany and the surrounding areas and having to hide and run and be fearful and full of terror and to finally get caught and be drug off to one of these camps and go in there and everything that happened. So it's just really troubling. So I guess this was not only a history lesson for me, but it just made me deeply consider the human nature. You want to take us out here with your final thought?
Yeah.
And before that, I want to tell the audience to make sure that you don't forget to go over to your channel, check your channel out,
Mhm.
and make sure you subscribe and everything like that. Links in the description. Take us out.
Definitely. The I think the most troubling thing for me about World War II history and then historical fiction such as this was is we have a tendency to put this distance between us and them and being like, oh, it was just so long ago. Wasn't that terrible? People sucked back then, but obviously things have gotten better. And to an extent, they have. But then you look at the state of America and how many Black people are being murdered for absolutely no reason by the state. So it's interesting to look at it in a historical context and then also in the context of what is currently happening. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, do I want to read about Nazis right now? Not really. But it is important to kind of have that juxtaposition between now and then.